Hi.
Hi.
I'm Alicia Latimer, and I wonder if you can tell us your name.
Okay, I'm Bob Nelson.
Okay, and some background information about yourself.
Okay, just a little bit. I grew up here in Tulsa,
Mm-hmm.
born in 1937. My father moved here with the railroads prior to World War II, and I went to Emerson Elementary School, just right, the old Emerson, before they tore down the real Emerson and built the new building.
Mm-hmm.
And so I go back a long way there. And I was always interested in making a little money from time to time, so I had a paper route. So I grew up on the streets, and that was back in the days when you would have to collect your money every week, 35 cents a week. And that was big money. And anyway, so I was on the streets almost every day. Well, it was every day. And kind of came up through that. Anyway, went to Emerson and then Roosevelt Junior High, and then my dad and mom moved from where we lived on North Boston to the Will Rogers district, and went there. And I did end up with, I got polio in '52, so that affected my life quite a bit. But anyway, I'm still here and I'm still kicking, and I said I'm going to die with it, not cause of it. So I've done a lot of things they said I couldn't do, but I've done them.
Now, you said when you were born here in Tulsa.
But born in Hot Springs, Arkansas. And I was adopted, and so
Okay.
my parents brought me here. We have a brother and sister. They were adopted later. So we have 3 adoptees here in Tulsa.
Now, what was your father's full name?
Henry A. Nelson.
And where was he born?
He's born in Springfield, Missouri.
And your mother?
And her name was Louise Lawson, and then she married Dad, and I'm not sure, I think she was born in Missouri,
Okay.
but I'm not sure where.
Okay. So your mom and dad, do you know when they moved to Tulsa?
Yeah, just prior to World War II, about 1939, 1940, somewhere in there.
And do you know where they lived?
Yeah, 1139 North Boston.
1139 North Boston.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so when you were adopted, they brought you to 1139 North Boston.
I have no idea. I think went down to Hugo, Oklahoma. I was several places because Dad was with the railroad. They moved around quite a bit.
Okay. But now who are your sister, brother? What are your sisters and brothers' names?
Okay, my sister's name is Ann. My brother's name is Larry. Ann lives in Pueblo, Colorado, and Larry now lives in Memphis.
Okay, now
And,
Ann's last name was?
well, she's a Nelson. I don't know what it
Nelson.
was before.
And her last name now is?
It's still Nelson.
Still Nelson. Okay, and your brother's name was Nelson as an adoptee. And of course his name would have stayed Nelson.
Yeah.
Okay. And they were born, do you know when they were born?
Oh, golly, I think my brother, not for sure, 46, I think, 46, 47, somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
There's about 10 years difference in our ages.
And your sister was born then?
Just about the same time. They're real close in age.
Okay. So, education, religion, if you care to.
Okay,
if you
no,
care
my
to share.
religion grew up here in Tulsa, where we were fundamentalists and basically Baptist. I think you would put that in the category of being a Baptist.
Mm-hmm.
Several churches, and you don't dance and don't smoke, don't drink, don't do all that stuff, which everybody did. And then, which I always thought was kind of interesting, the hypocrisy that, when the bootleggers delivered the booze to the churches, you made you wonder.
The bootleggers delivered the booze to the churches.
Mm-hmm. And anyway, we won't go there, but it was, I remember that my paper route, I took extra papers to the bootleggers because they would always give me the money to buy extra papers when they were picked up for delivering booze.
Okay.
And but the police would pick them up from time to time, but nothing really ever happened.
Okay.
And but they like to send them to their friends.
Okay. So you grew up during the era of segregation.
Yeah, just went to Emerson, which was just on North Boston, it was just white.
All white?
All white.
Okay. Do you recall any African American people anywhere in the neighborhood that you grew
Okay,
up in?
this share one experience that I had, and we weren't, and this was more when I would be more like 12, 13, playing football, and there were a group of white guys. We were trying to play football, and we didn't have very many, only 7, 8, 9 of us. And there were some black kids that we saw that were just kind of hanging around. And this was like at about Cincinnati and Latimer, where the lot was, not too far from where we are right now. And anyway, they were looking at us, and we were looking at them and says, well, why don't y'all play ball? So we did. And we did, I just remember we played ball. When it was, we went over, when we through playing and went back to our house. Well, my dad met me and said, what you been doing? And I said, I've been playing ball. And said, who with? And I said, well, we're just down there playing ball. And he said, with black kids? And I said, yep. And he said, don't do that anymore. And we were not allowed to go back and play ball with black kids, even if we didn't have enough to play.
Did
And
you use the term black?
yeah.
You did?
I will, no.
Okay.
But anyway, seeing some of these kids later, we said, we can't play. And he says, well, we can't play with you either. We can't play with white kids. And because we'll all get in trouble. And so we look at one another like, what's the deal? Because we didn't know there was a real problem. Didn't occur to us, or didn't occur to me anyway. And that was one of my first meetings. But it was all along Cincinnati, just between downtown and go over to Pine. But
What was all, what was?
that's what I just grew up in that area, and that's through papers and that. And I will share this with you that I said that my parents moved in '51 from the Roosevelt area, or where we lived on North Boston, to the Will Rogers. And I remember Dad coming home and he said a black family moved from the east side of Elgin, I think it was Elgin, to the west side. We have to move. And so I said, well, okay. And so they did. And that's one of the reasons that we moved.
Okay.
And I remember the paper route. I could take some papers to one of the houses and they would deliver them for me, east of Elgin.
Okay.
I think that was the name of the street that was there.
What do you remember about Tulsa's historic African American community, the Greenwood District, from your experience growing up?
In growing up, I always wondered that somebody says I can't find out, I usually find out. And one of the things that got me was that the Greenwood area was a very viable economic system, and I picked up on that early in my thinking, and I always wondered why we would destroy a viable economic system. And I think the thing that bothered me the most was not being able to ask questions and have a discussion or hear about it as just a kid growing up, white kid. And I hadn't made that distinction totally as a kid. I do remember going to when you're mentioning this, to the railroad station, and the restrooms had colored restrooms and white restrooms. I always thought that was peculiar. Because I just thought it was odd as a kid. And then one of the things that really hacked me off is I used to like to ride in the back of the bus because it would bounce a lot and you could get bounced around. And I was run off the back of the bus 2 or 3 times because I was the wrong color, and I didn't quite put that together.
How old were you?
Oh, I would have been 10, 11, somewhere in there. And just a kid, you know, and didn't get to ride too many times, but I always thought that was a peculiar thing.
Did you ever go to the Greenwood District?
We drove by every once in a while. We'd drive down Archer, and we'd say, "My, look, you at all the black kids or the black people. Aren't they interested?"
What was it like?
It's just like a lot of people being very friendly and smiling, and they were having a good time, and we were just looking like, I don't know why we did it quite that way when you mention it that way, but we just drove through, and that was the end of it. It was not, didn't think too much one way or the other.
Was it a short distance, or was it
It wasn't very long. It was probably for 4, 5, 6 blocks.
Okay.
And just going down Archer, and then to actually go through Greenwood, I'm sure I did, but I don't remember per se.
Okay. The neighborhood that you grew up in, can you describe it? What was it like?
We were working, middle class. I want to say middle class. I'm not sure if middle's quite right, because they were all hardworking people. And this was during the war, and there were a number of neighbors who were killed during the war. And so there was a good deal of sadness and concern. And we didn't talk about World War II either. The schools didn't mention much about World War II. When I was growing up, as a teacher, Vietnam, we talked about it. The kids talked about it. The kids knew about it. Korea, we knew about it. We talked about it. But World War II, when I was growing up, the schools, it would never come up in the school. Of course, this was elementary school too, so maybe it was not appropriate. But I always felt like I wished I'd known more about World War II, back from that perspective instead of reading about it. But there was a lot of don't talk about it. And
There was a lot of don't talk about.
it's about wars, about races, about anything that was uncomfortable a little bit. Feelings.
Okay.
Maybe feelings would fit.
Who would say don't talk about it?
They didn't really say it exactly. I mean, it was by innuendo and by the look. And I don't know about you, but my dad, when he looked at me a certain way, I knew that I better go a little different direction. And if I'd get in trouble at school, I'd come home and he'd whoop me, and then he'd say, "Now, what'd you do?" So the schools were always right, but when he'd look at me, I knew that I ought not to tread too much more in that direction.
Can you describe, as you know it, the 1921 race riot, the events leading up to it, and those that followed? Just what you know.
Okay, almost anything that I know of, I've read more as an adult than experienced. But and you mentioned the name of the people involved, and I don't remember names exactly there, but a black kid was accused of doing something to a white girl on an elevator. And I always thought that was a peculiar place to do it, in a public elevator, if you're going to do that. But anyway, it generated into something kind of wild. And I think one of the interesting things was, out of World War I, guns were available to not only whites but to black people. And so people were armed, but it seemed to me like there was a lot of irrational unhappiness during those times preceding World War I, and the availability of training and the whole thing. And there was a lot of irrational fear that was placed on that, and then people just went crazy, but there was hate. And I never can quite understand how you could hate a person that you'd never met or seen. And it's quite obvious to me that you can look at someone and tell their color, or there are a lot of things about them, but after you're with them a while, that seems to be, well, that's it, and we'll go on to something else. And my feeling is that there was a lot of irrational hate that was brought to the surface. And I think one of the things that, as a white person, we were taught by innuendo to dislike or to actually hate. And I never did quite get there yet. And they're still working on it with me, but it won't work. No, it just, somehow, you know, I've got some good friends who are Native American.
Mm-hmm.
And I know one of my best friends, when I say best Indian friends, I really know he's Indian. And he knows I'm not, and I don't want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't want to be. We're not wannabes. But when we get past that, we can have some serious talks. And one of the things I found out in doing a little research is that I have a friend that we taught school in summer together here, and he was at Booker T and a math teacher, and I taught math at Will Rogers. And I just thought that if this had been in the 50s, Mr. Jackson would have received 30% less money than I would have. And I'd heard about it, but I didn't know for sure till we just got in a research project. That was true.
What was Mr.
Robert Jackson.
Mr. Robert Jackson was an African American.
Yeah, and we taught summer school together. That's where I got to know him. And I don't know, I think he had quite a reputation as a teacher at Booker T, whatever that meant. But we talked. We'd sit around and talk about, you know, algebra and the whole thing. And it was just interesting to that we weren't really different.
Okay. But now, about the race riot, you don't know, do you know anyone who, or you never heard anyone discuss it who had been
I knew there was a race
in it?
Well, I knew there was a race riot. I knew people were involved. I would go a little bit east of where I was supposed to,
Okay.
and see that there were buildings that were not there.
Okay.
And it seemed rather vacant. But there was a fear, and I think fear is a little strong, but a feeling of being uncomfortable to even start asking and find out from both sides. And since then, as an adult, I could talk to, black folk could talk to me, and we would go different places with those feelings. And let me share you something with you that happened when I was working with Tulsa Public Schools, and I was in federal programs, and worked with a guy, it's Robert Burton.
Okay.
And Robert and I had basically the same kind of job in federal programs with the Tulsa schools. And one of the things we were to do was to go out and talk with parents.
Now, what year was this?
This would have been in the late 70s.
Okay.
Bob Burton is black, and Bob Nelson is white. And Bob Burton went on to, he was very successful. But we were at a school on North Peoria, and Bob was giving the little talk, and we just had this little thing to go over and review with the parents. And there was a white man whose neck was red and whose stomach was not small. Said he didn't want to listen to no black person tell him about stuff.
Okay.
So I got up, and Bob, I call him Bobby Burton. Bob went over and kind of went to the side, and then he kind of left. But I continued to talk, and same old stuff we just traded off. It was just his turn. And so anyway, I finished, and we went on. We got in the car. Didn't say a whole lot about it, but about 2 weeks later, we were at a school on the north side in Greeley. And there was a black man whose neck was red, whose stomach was protruding, and I was giving the talk. He didn't want to hear anything about any honky talking. So Bob just got up and moved me over. I went out, hung around the car till he got finished. Mm-hmm. And then we got in the car and we're heading back to the service center. And he says, "Now, brother, let's go have some chicken." So we stopped and ate some chicken. But that was the very subtle things that we understood with one another that occurred with races. and share another little incident with a Native American. And this didn't go back to the race riot, but finished an examination by the feds. And they were examining the Indian Pupil Education Program with Tulsa Public Schools. And Archie Mason, full-blood Indian, Cherokee Osage. His dad was one of the last medicine men in the Osage Nation. And this white guy from Washington, D.C., I asked him, is there anything else you want to ask? Would you like to ask Mr. Mason? And he said, yeah. How long does it take you to braid your hair? And so my arm went out to Arch and I had him sit down. And I said, we got to walk down the hall. Because Archie was about to end up with a scalp. And the poor guy, I don't think he ever totally understood how bad he had stepped in it.
Insulted.
But there were a lot of things that were going on that as a white person you would run into. And I can remember being at Will Rogers High School when we were involved in desegregation. And we were changing the boundaries between Booker T and Will Rogers. And it was just discussion. And a white man had a heart attack and he died the next morning. And I mean, he was very agitated about the whole thing. And most of the staff at Rogers was just like, you know, come on, what's going on? This is too much. However, we did talk about when one of the teachers went from Rogers to Washington to teach swimming, they gave him watermelon. And this was in the 1970s, you know, the 69, 70 interval.
No, the teachers gave it.
Yeah, the teachers gave the other teacher watermelon. So there was a very subtle change. And the guy that they did that to said became one of the assistant principals out there. So, I mean, he handled it okay.
When he gave him the watermelon, was it done maliciously? Was it done as a joke?
Oh,
was it significant?
A malicious joke.
He meant to.
There was, I mean, it was more than just one person doing it to one person. I mean, it was a.
Because he was going nowhere to teach.
He was going to teach Booker T, a black school. And that was before Booker T became one of the premier schools academically and athletically and every other way.
Okay.
So, but it's a very subtle shift, and I grew up in that, where you could have a black friend, but you couldn't talk with them or ask questions. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes.
You know, it's okay to, you know, be friends, but not really, because they're different. They, you know, when I say they, black folk are different. Well, you're a lady, not a guy. We're different. And so it was using the same analogy in a way between black and white. And to an extent, there's some truth to that. We're different, but we're not. And we can respect people and get past those things. If you're a Baptist, you're different than a Catholic.
Okay. So you didn't really know anything about Dick Rowland and Sarah Page?
Other than what I had read. And it just seemed, as a kid, I thought that was a little peculiar that she tried to do it on a public elevator.
Yeah. Can you describe your feelings about the role of the city of Tulsa and the state of Oklahoma in the wake of the 1921 race riot, if you have feelings about that?
Okay, as somewhat more as an adult, I thought it was horrible what went on, and the fact that one of the things that disturbed me the most growing up and digging, trying to find out a little bit of information, is the fact that newspapers and documentation on what really happened was destroyed. And I think as time went on, the destruction of that information wasn't total. There was some of it was kept by a few individuals. But it was not public record, it was not transparent at all. And the news media actually destroyed the newspapers that should have had the documentation of the race riot in there, and it was, but then they destroyed it.